Welcome to the film Historic Houses and Landscapes of Western New Paltz, a production of Historic Huguenot Street. I'm Marietta Schneider, Board Chair of Historic Huguenot Street, and with me is Val Osborne, our Vice Chair.
This film features the historic hamlets of Western New Paltz, the people who settled there, the houses they built, and their landscapes.
The film recognizes that these lands were the sacred ancestral homelands of the Munsee Lenape people. We pay honor to their ancestors past and present, and we are committed to build a more inclusive and equitable space for all. Many of the homesteads you will see relied on enslaved Africans to work on the land and in the households. And while enslaved Africans' contributions are not well documented, they should be recognized as part of the fabric contributing to the growth and prosperity of our community.
The film also explores the lives of the original builders of the houses, you will see, and celebrates the stewardship of the current owners. Our sincere thanks to Mary Ottaway, Jim Ottaway, and Professor William Rhodes for their long-term support of our programs and their sponsorship of this film and its publications.
Western New Paltz lies between Gardiner and Rosendale and rises from the floodplains of the Wallkill River to the wooded plateaus and pastures in the lee of the Shawangunk Mountain range. Its stunning natural beauty and rich natural resources have drawn diverse people to this region for millennia to the present day. For thousands of years, these lands were the homelands of the indigenous Munsee-speaking Lenni Lenape people, referred to in early colonial documents as Esopus Indians, who led a long and sustainable existence here, drawing on its plentiful seasonal resources from diverse habitats for fishing, foraging, hunting, and crops. Ample evidence of their presence remains in local place names, artifacts, historic documents, and folklore. In the 1670s, Huguenot refugees followed a well-worn indigenous path from Hurley along the west bank of the Wallkill River to the fields opposite New Paltz. Stories recount that they were advised by the Lenape to settle on the high ground of the river's east bank, where New Paltz is today. In 1677, Huguenot settlers signed an agreement with the Lenape for the use of more than 39,000 acres on both sides of the river. This agreement was ratified as a patent by the English Governor Andros. The New Paltz patent and other patents to its south, acquired later by the Du Bois and Hasbrook families, defined the township of New Paltz until the 1840s and 50s, when small portions at the north and south ends were ceded to Rosendale and Gardiner. Beginning in the early 18th century, enterprising second and third generation Huguenot descendants migrated across the river and established farms in 4 areas that would become known as the hamlets of Guilford, Libertyville, Butterville, and Springtown. Many of the homesteads visited in the tour relied on enslaved people to work the land and households. While enslaved Africans' contributions are not well documented, they should be recognized as part of the fabric contributing to the growth and prosperity of our community. These subsistence farming settlements evolved into self-sufficient communities, which included basic services, stores and a hotel, blacksmith shops and wagon makers, grist and lumber mills, and tanners. The establishment of a church, a school, and a post office in the 19th century became the defining characteristics of a hamlet.
Hello, my name is Cara Lee, and I'm a volunteer with Historic Huguenot Street. I'm going to be your tour guide as we visit 10 historic houses. We're going to start across the Wallkill River in Springtown.
Springtown, at the northern end, was named for its abundant water supply, its freshwater springs, wetlands, and the rich alluvial floodplains along the river, which made it an ideal location for agriculture, especially wheat, flax, rye, and corn.
3 18th century Dutch-style stone houses still exist here on the banks of the Wallkill. They share common characteristics: an initial 2 rooms with 1.5 stories, extended by another room a decade or 2 later for their growing families. A prominent date stone was often roughly inscribed at the entrance. Hello, William.
Hello.
It's really nice to be here on your porch on this hot summer day. I understand that you've been here since 2009 and that you did quite a serious restoration of the property and the house, and that your husband was the architect, so you're really well acquainted with what went on.
Yes.
And perhaps you could talk to us about when you did the restoration, what you found, and what you were eager to preserve.
Well, it was interesting that what we found when we found the house was the thing we wanted to preserve.
There you go.
What was unique about this one was it was still the original footprint. It had not really been messed around with from a structural standpoint. And even though there's been changes over the 270 years, it had an original character that Daniel fell in love with, and we really wanted to restore. When we bought the house, I did a lot of research, and it's interesting that in the French-Indian Wars, this side of the Wallkill was sort of like a no-go area. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't till about the 1755, which is when this house was built, it wasn't until then that people started migrating over this way. And that was before the end of the French-Indian Wars, but I think things had calmed down a little bit.
So migrating from New Paltz and
migrating
Rosendale.
from New Paltz to here, because New Paltz was this protected area, it had the river around it. Mm-hmm. And so this side of the river was actually a bit risky.
So could you talk a little bit about the restoration?
When we bought the house, it had been well looked after, but it had been totally overgrown. It had been modified in the 30s, so it had been broken up into quite a lot of little rooms. But what we wanted to take it back to was the original structure.
Which was probably a 2-room structure on the ground floor?
The original structure was 2 rooms on the ground floor, and then space up in the attic, which was a grain loft. And so when we started taking out some of the windows and repairing some of the windows, we discovered that on the top floor there was what's called a mow door, which is where they used to bring all the grain in. So we restored that mow door. We put in a full glass plate window. What we also found was that on top of that 2-room original house, there was a kitchen. The kitchen was added later. It was added in about 1765. And we know it was 1765 because it has a jamless fireplace in. And if it had been later than 1765, then the jamless fireplace wouldn't have been there. They'd have had a jammed fireplace, thanks to the English. As is traditional in that Dutch style, each one of those 3 rooms ultimately had a door on the outside facing the road. So this door here was one of the doors. There's a door that we restored. And then there's a 3rd door that you can only just see the sort of ghost of in the wall, where you can see where there was an original door.
So we talked about this a little before, that the houses here on Springtown Road probably originally faced the river rather than the road, and the road has actually been moved.
Yeah, not quite sure the exact date, but it's sometime around 1800 to 1815.
Do you think that was due to flooding?
I think when you ride horses, having a light flood, the floods you get here are they're shallow floods and they don't move very fast.
Yeah.
It just slowly rises up and then slowly drops down again. And we've had many of those since we've lived here. I think when you ride horses, that's not that much of a problem. You just wade through it. Yeah. I think when you start having carts and cars and things like that, then there was a definite need to have
higher ground.
So it's clear from spending a little time with you that you love living here.
I do.
Are there other things about the house that you particularly love?
Oh, there's so much. It's been a labor of love. I mean, one of the things is just this original structure. We took it back to the original plank floors. We tried to maintain that sense of each of the 3 rooms that originally existed. But then we didn't want to live in a museum, so we also brought in a whole load of quite our own modern tastes. And so what I love about this house is this combination of old and modern. And even though we've got a whole load of things that are mid-century modern furniture, for me there's a connection between those really simple early days where everything was stripped back out of utility, and modern design, which is everything stripped back for aesthetics.
Yeah, interesting.
And so for me, one of the other things I loved has been able to build a house that I want to live in, that can pay homage to its origins, but also bring in some new modern pieces that I just love and adore. So it's that ability to bring those two things together has been fantastic.
Well, is there anything else you want to tell us?
It's sort of really interesting to discover all these little bits of history. But there was so many, the different families who had owned their house. There were so many characters. There were so many amazing people who did so much, not just for this house, but for Springtown and the region. There was a woman, Jane Little, who had their house in the 60s, and she petitioned. They were going to turn this into a commercial area for building.
Oh.
Springtown was going to be commercial.
Oh.
And she got all of the people in the neighborhood to sign petitions to keep it agricultural. So the reason we have all the farms along Springtown Road now is because of Jane Little and this petition to keep Springtown agricultural.
It's really one of the most active agricultural areas in New Paltz.
It really is, and it could have not been. It could have been just like any one of the other streets.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those great stories. About 20 years later, north of the Deo house, Daniel Du Bois and his wife Catherine built the first section of their stone house. Daniel's son Abraham probably built the 1799 western wing. A large cellar kitchen with a door facing Springtown Road is believed to have once served as a local tavern. The dormers and porch are 20th century additions. Hi, Dwayne. Thank you so much for having us to your house. Absolutely amazing house. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how you landed here. How did you find this house? What brought you here?
Yeah, so my girlfriend Jessica and I were vacationing in the city in 2018, I think, and had always heard about the Hudson Valley. Just thought we'd check it out. So we rented a car, came up here for 2 or 3 days, and just drove all over. We love to just drive and adventure, you know, and totally fell in love with the area, just pretty immediately. And we always knew we kind of wanted to leave. We lived in LA, and we wanted to kind of get out of there.
Yeah.
And we just knew this was the place. So we came back a couple of times in the next year or so just to get more of a feel for it, and started to talk to some realtors, look at homes, and that's it. We found this one.
So how would you characterize what's so special about the Hudson Valley? I'm interested, because you came to it with fresh eyes.
Well, the first thing that struck us was the just natural beauty of it. You know, just so much water and greenery, and such a variety of landscape and stuff like that. And the history is so rich in history, and which we both love. And it was just such a different feel than where we're from in LA, which is essentially a desert and a sprawling metropolis, you know. So that was the big draw.
Well, we've just had the chance to walk around inside this house, which is quite remarkable. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what you love about the house and what you've learned about the house living here. Yeah.
So, I mean, the house itself is just stunning, obviously, you know, if you see it from the outside. We knew we wanted an old house, and really the older the better, we thought. And we also wanted something that didn't require a lot of work. And this one, even though it was out of our price range at first, we kind of put it off till last. We looked at like maybe 10, 12 other houses and didn't find anything we loved. And so we decided, okay, we'll come look at this one. knowing it was out of our price range, but we're just like, why not? And eventually the owner knocked off quite a lot on it to allow us to buy it. And but yeah, it was just perfect in every way. It was old, it was beautiful, it was ready to move in, didn't require any work. The location was beautiful, right on the river here. And
Yeah, you could
Springtown.
really just throw a stone and you'd be in the river.
Yeah, literally about 50 feet away.
Well, what would you like future generations to know about this house?
I guess, they obviously don't build them like this anymore.
No, they don't.
And I think it says a lot about the people back then, the people who built it. And I think this house kind of speaks to that a lot. And as does the history and the culture in this area. And it's just something that, unfortunately, we may be losing a little bit these days, I don't think the younger generations are quite into that kind of thing, unfortunately. So I think it's really important that what you guys are doing to kind of preserve that. And
Well, there's certainly a sense of permanence to this house.
yes,
Right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
been through a lot. Well, what else would you like to tell us about the house or the property or yourself?
Just that we're just so happy to be here, and very honored to live in this house. It's an amazing house, and we feel very privileged and honored to be in it, and we hope to be here for a very long time.
That's great. Well, I actually think that your love for the house is really expressed in the things you've chosen to put in it and how it's just beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
By the 1820s, Springtown's population and economy rivaled New Paltz. It was located along a major transportation route for the stagecoach line and livestock drives from the north to New York City and Philadelphia, which stimulated agricultural production and commercial activity for the numerous taverns, hotels, and shops lining the Springtown route. The opening of the Wallkill Valley Railway in Rosendale in 1872 spurred a lively boarding house industry to accommodate summer vacationers.
This house presents a Victorian first impression with its full-length Italianate veranda and decorative brackets, a clapboard second story, and a two-story addition in back. In reality, it's a mid-1750s stone structure built in two stages by Jacobus Hasbrook and his wife Sarah that was enlarged and updated in the 1870s by the Christian Deo family as Woodbine Villa for vacationers during the Hamlets boarding house era. It was listed on the National Register in the 1980s. I'm here with Rachel Helm, who is the manager for the Carolee Schneemann Foundation, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the history of this house.
Yeah, absolutely. So Carolee Schneemann, she's a visual artist, a writer. Her body of work kind of encompasses any possible medium you could experiment with. She acquired this house in 1965, and from the very beginning she was really interested in the history of the property and, just a great interest in history and the past in general. And in her telling, the Lenape tribe, the stewards of this land in that period of time, had agreed to help these three brothers to locate each a house here on Springtown Road that would be above the flood line. And so that's kind of the genesis point of her interest in this history. Carolee was a fascinating person. She was deeply inspired by the natural world and by dream space. And in her telling, when she and her then partner, James Tenney, and James was a composer and a pianist, they had been in the city and they wanted someplace to, just kind of check out and be in a more bucolic, natural setting. And her cousins owned this house and had stopped farming and were going to auction the house. Carolee, one way or another, convinced them to let her take possession of the house. And so when Carolee starts experiencing these kind of dream voices that are given her instruction about uncovering aspects of the house, they come to her as these kind of little mysteries. So the first dream that she has is about the stone on the front of the house. She has a dream of a golden stone and instruction to take a chisel and remove the cement plaster that's on the exterior of the porch. And you know, her and her partner Jim, they're going back and forth about it because, you know, this sounds exciting, but you know, what do they know? And finally they decide, let's just go do it, hit the chisel, and they start to uncover all of this original stone. The second dream that she had, she was instructed to, again with her chisel, start to knock away the linoleum that lined the floor just inside the front entryway. And again, you know, once some of the linoleum was gone, it reveals these broad chestnut boards. I mean, something that you just don't see. And the last unpeeling, if you will, in this story is the ceiling of the downstairs. It was a drop ceiling. And you could imagine what a house like this would be like. It'd be so dark and feel so claustrophobic. And again, the dream voice tells her to take so many steps into the living area and to take a hammer and just start hitting the ceiling. And they break down the ceiling and they reveal all the original joist beams and rafters for the home. And, you know, at that point, the house, as Carolee said, she said it started to breathe. That when things began to open up like that, the light changed and just like the energy of the house kind of became a little bit more full.
That's such a great story.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the plans are for the foundation for the future of the house and programs that might enable you to share her work with people here.
So Carolee established the foundation in 2014 with friends and colleagues with the hope of not just preserving her legacy as an artist, but also to preserve this house and this property, which really it is like a work of art of hers. You know, her hands and eye and palette are on every surface of the house. And what the foundation hopes to do is in the coming years is to create an artist residency program here to serve artists who are doing similar aesthetic experimentations as Carolee, filmmakers and writers and visual artists, for them to have the opportunity to come here in this place that was so enchanting to Carolee and so invigorating creatively and psychically, and yeah, to have the chance to just perhaps have that same kind of expression to help inform their own work. Yeah, essentially that's where we're moving towards in the future.
That's a wonderful vision. I'm sure she would be hovering over and giving people dreams.
Yeah, that would be my hope.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
By the mid-1930s, the closure of passenger train service and the rising popularity of auto travel brought an end to the hamlet's tourism prosperity. Today, farming remains a mainstay of the area. Butterville, initially named for the area's many butternut trees, is located in the center of the Shawangunk foothills above New Paltz. It offered ample lumber for building materials, fuel, barrel making, and a tanning operation. Mountain quarries provided quartz conglomerate for foundations and millstones. When cleared, its rolling hills were ideal for pasturing livestock and animal feed, and later a booming dairy business. Among the earliest settlers here were members of the Society of Friends, who were pacifists and leaders in the movements to abolish slavery and provide women's rights.
Thank you for having us here today. It's such a beautiful day, and we've had a chance to walk around the property a little bit. So perhaps you could describe to us a little bit the setting for your house.
Well, the Humpo Creek runs down below, and then there's a little creek that runs alongside, but that has no name. but originates somewhere up in the mountain. And this is 75 acres, and it's under a preservation easement with Mohonk Preserve.
I understand this is one of the oldest farms in Butterville, and it was originally about 85 acres. Can you talk a little bit about the farming that happened here?
Yeah, it was fascinating to find out that this originally was called the Quaker Neighborhood, and it was settled by British Quakers. Their family originated from Norfolk. I looked it up in the Quaker family histories, and Zephaniah Birdsall and his wife Anna. So yes, and there used to be a Dutch barn here at some point. We don't know what happened to that they built. He had 400 acres originally, and then he sold it off to various other Quakers. Mm-hmm. And he also gave money for a Quaker meeting house. It used to be on the corner, but it's long gone. So he was very active in the whole Quaker neighborhood. Yeah, so Butterville was the Quaker neighborhood.
Right.
So,
And you were talking about how there's still a farmer who uses some of your fields for dairy cows.
yeah, because it's one of the biggest chunks of land just in this vicinity still intact. And but you know, with property taxes as they are, I've had to lease it to a farmer, and some of it's fenced in, and we have beef cattle.
Well, let's look at the house for a minute and talk about what it was like when you first arrived, and how did you find this very special spot?
It was just serendipitous. My partner and I had gone to stay at Mohonk Mountain House, which is just above, and loved the area, and then found out that my partner at the time had an old college friend who lived across the street and still does. And she said to us, you know, that farm across the street from me is for sale. And we hadn't been thinking of buying anything, and we didn't look at anything else either. We just bought it.
Could you describe to us a little bit how the house was when you found it and what you chose to do with what you found?
It was very run down. It was in a really bad state. The original stone house had long disappeared, probably at the turn of the century, and it had been reframed, and it was just not in good shape. And so we decided to take it down, this half of the house, because this half was okay, and that's 1840s, 1830s, and just rebuild on the exact same footprint. We had to lose the original foundation, unfortunately, because it was in such bad shape. And we worked with an architect who knew a lot about this period and this area, and to make it look as sort of historically convincing as possible, because I wanted to keep that feel, because that mattered to me a great deal, that we keep the history.
So is there anything more you'd like to tell us about your house or the land or your feelings about it?
Yes, I'd love to know more about the Native American history, because I feel that there's this sort of invisible story, and that the properties has this sacred feeling, which is why I find it so creative. And I'm sure that the Humpo Creek was very important to them, and also some of the rocks around here. And I just would love to know what went on before the Europeans arrived.
Well, thank you for having us here today. I actually don't feel like leaving. It's so nice. It's really nice to meet you, and really nice to see the work that you've done to preserve and steward this land and this house.
That's great, thank you.
Hi, Barry.
Hi, Kara.
Nice to be here with you today.
Okay.
We're so interested in what you know about the property that you have, and let's start by talking about the setting, because the setting's so remarkable and beautiful.
When I bought this from somebody named Albert Harris, I think it was 1972, he bragged that it was surrounded on all four sides by the property of Mohonk. Mm-hmm. If you ask me what I like my frogs, and I like the birds,
Yeah.
and these flowers.
Yeah.
I've fixed up the house several times. I've owned it for 50 years. So every time I do a new one, I like that the best.
How did you land on this property?
I was living in New Paltz. I lived at 12 North Chestnut Street, which always had the parking lot between my house and the homestead.
The homestead.
The homestead was New Paltz's best bar at the time.
Okay. Before my time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I bought that in 1969, and I was a lawyer and living above the law office. And I would drive around looking for, what's going on here.
Yeah.
And I always drove by this house. It was just beautiful. So one day I knocked on the door and asked him if he was interested in selling. And he was getting old enough that
Yep.
he didn't want to maintain all of this. So we worked out a deal, and I bought 60 acres here.
Also, you were describing to me earlier a little bit about the landscaping, which is you have lovely mature trees and flowering shrubs and so on. Just talk a little bit about how that happened.
Way, way back, we built this pond over here, and we were lucky enough to have somebody named Alan Grumberg, who at one point was the head gardener at Mohonk. And he was getting a little older and wanted to cut back on all that work up there. He stayed, but he's the one who planted all these things.
So let's talk about the house for a minute. We know that it's the oldest standing house on Butterville Road, and a lot of things have happened to the house before it came to you. And we can see on the house that there used to be another section attached. Can you just describe that a little bit?
Sure. There was, in fact, you can see the roof line
Yes.
there where it gets a little darker. And I think one of the old pictures that you have shows the frame house
Yep.
still here. And it was
Yep.
here when I bought it. And those doors, the window on top and the door on the ground floor, literally went from house to house. This fireplace was in the living room
Yeah.
of the other house.
Got it.
And there was a fire in 1985, a furnace fire, and we weren't here. The heat sort of stayed inside the stone walls and didn't damage the frame house. But rather than have two things to improve,
Right.
we decided to give it to some people who used to work for us, actually.
So the frame part of the house was actually moved, and it's right over there behind the trees.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it was moved on rollers.
Wow.
Literally jacked up and just pulled across the lawn.
Huh.
It was kind of fun.
So really, then you were left with a shell of a house, and that was your canvas to work with.
Yes.
And you've made many, as you said, over the years, many changes, but you've retained that historic stone
Yeah,
house.
the exterior is
Yeah.
essentially the same.
Right.
Maybe put new windows in, and we changed where the front door was.
Right.
Used to be facing the barn on this side of the house, and we moved it to that side of the house.
And the barn over here now is converted to a residence.
Yes.
Yes.
Which I did in late 90s.
Well, what else would you like to tell us about the house?
It's got a really nice kitchen these days.
That makes sense, given that you're a chef.
Yeah. And once you're in the house, you don't hear the noises. I wish I had better windows on Butterville Road looking at the mountainside.
Yes.
But there's just two tiny windows on that side. But that keeps it very quiet.
Well, you walked us out on the lawn a few minutes ago, and it made me appreciate how close we are to the ridge and how your house sits right below Skytop.
Yep. And I've walked Lenape Lane, and I walked Pine Road, and now I do the
River to Ridge.
Ridge Trail.
Yeah,
So it's just a wonderful place to live.
yeah. Well, you're fortunate to live here, and the house has benefited from your care.
Two defining developments in Butterville's history transformed its character forever into a beautiful preserve of natural open spaces and breathtaking views. In the 1880s, Albert Smiley began purchasing farmlands in the foothills, including parts of the Hasbrook farm, to provision his Mohonk Mountain house. These purchases were eventually included in the right-of-way easements granted by the Smileys in the early 20th century for the construction of the Catskill Aqueduct, which provides drinking water to New York City. The construction of the aqueduct disfigured the landscape for a time, with a massive tunnel through the mountain at Bonnecoo and under the Wallkill River at Libertyville, and railroad tracks across the fields. Many of the hamlet's inhabitants were displaced when their homes were condemned or moved and converted to supply depots or boarding houses for construction workers. Today, more than 8,000 acres of the mountain range and these farmlands have been conserved in perpetuity by Mohonk Preserve. Open Space Institute's River to Ridge Trail 360 acres of prime lands, crosses the landscape from the bridge at New Paltz to the mountain's carriage roads. Libertyville and Guilford to the south, once known by their indigenous name Naskatuck, still have a more rugged, less traveled feel. The territory's hill and dale character, its high knolls overlooking the meandering river, interspersed with pockets of floodplains below, extend westward to the Shawangunk foothills. Settled in 1698 by the second-generation Du Bois brothers, Louis and Solomon, it was mostly occupied by their descendants into the mid-19th century. The Guilford patent, to its south, was the domain of the Hasbrooks for more than 200 years.
Two of New Paltz's finest brick houses are located in Libertyville and Guilford. Both are listed on the National Register. They share in common their grand two-story proportions and 5-bay federal layout around a commanding central doorway and hall with sidelights. The aesthetically pleasing and structurally sound facades were built using Flemish bond and American bond bricklaying techniques. In 1822, Josiah Du Bois, a direct descendant of Louis Du Bois, built his elegant dwelling on the foundation of his father's stone house. From the paneled and louvered window shutters to the gabled entry porch with an arched fanlight and keystone above the entry door, this house bears all the classic hallmarks of the federal style. Hi, Marianne.
Hi, Karen.
So nice to be in your beautiful house, and we're so
Nice to
glad
have
that
you here.
we're including this as part of the 2021 house tour. It's really great to be here. And we'd love to hear from you about the house and what it is that you love about living here.
We've lived in this house for just shy of 16 years. We moved in 2005. And it's hard to pick just one thing because first glance you can see so many things. But I think those things that really stood out to both my husband and I are the beautiful wood floors, the windows, and the trim. And when we moved into this house, it was obviously clean and restored, and there was just something so clean and pure and beautiful about just the raw bones of this house and how the light came through. So.
Well, I think those things are like immediately apparent when
Yeah.
you walk into the house.
I think from the outside it would appear as though it's a grand federal home, but the spaces inside are much more intimate.
Can we talk about the outside for a minute?
Sure.
Where the house is situated and what that tells you about who lived here and why it's here.
Well, my understanding is that this is the highest point on the west side of the Wallkill River. So Josiah Du Bois, who built this home, my understanding of him is that he was the wealthiest of the Du Bois brothers and considered to be a gentleman farmer. I'm not sure if that's totally accurate, but you can see that it was a working farm. The other aspect that I do love about this house is, again, from the road, it looks formal. But when you come to the back of the house and see all the outbuildings and the barns and the blacksmith shop and chicken coop and granary, you see that it's a very beautiful farm setting back here, which was a working farm.
So when you purchased the property and you were making decisions about restoration, there are a lot of outbuildings, and you clearly chose to preserve them, which I think is great because it saves all that agricultural history.
Our only thought was to preserve them. It's a historic landmark property. We had no inclination to get rid of any of those. That's what makes living on this property and the history of this property special. And we restored each of those buildings, replacing their roofs, protecting the integrity of them. And each of them has a different meaning and use on this property. So it was really about the protection and the preservation of the entire property.
Well, Marianne, is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
For many years I had kind of incubated this idea of a pumpkin carving festival.
That's how I met you.
Right. As a fundraising idea.
Yep.
And when we moved here, literally when we pulled up, across the field, there were sunflowers, there were pumpkins, and there were 2 fields So immediately I saw, oh my gosh, this could be a place where I could begin this. So we're cruising into our 15th year of Carve for a Cause. It was never my intention that the event would stay here for all of these years, but now no
But
one
all the
wants to
pumpkins
leave.
were there.
Now no one wants to
Yeah.
leave.
Yeah.
We, of course, paused it for the pandemic. This year, for our 15th anniversary, we're hopeful that we'll be able to offer it again. I would close by saying that this is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to live in a historic home, and I'm grateful that we have had the resources to care for this really exquisite piece of property.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
You've done a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Around 1850, Colonel Joseph Hasbrouck, great-grandson of the first Huguenot settler on the 2,000-acre Guilford patent south of Libertyville, built a grand brick house overlooking the Wallkill on the site of his father's house, which had been destroyed by fire in 1850. The central plan of the house is federal, like Josiah Du Bois's house that we just saw. Its picturesque character reflects the Italianate period, with paired windows and full-length open porches with bucolic views. Inside, there is a trio of pre-Civil War molding details, including Greek Revival, Gothic Revival, and Italianate styles. Two features of the house are unique in our area. One is the porch's delicate Gothic Revival 4 bundled columns with attenuated porch brackets that form pointed ogee arches. The second is the decorative overlay of bricks below the roofline, which provide a base for each ornate eave bracket. In the 20th century, after 200 years in the Hasbrouck family, the property became Camp Wallkill, run by the New York City-based Children's Aid Society. The house, listed on the National Register, is the only surviving farm building on the property. Hi, Ellis.
Hey, how are you?
It's so nice to be here at your house with you.
Thank you, thank you.
We think of this as the Joseph Hasbrouck house, but it's your house.
Well, it's
And-
still, the memory's still around.
That's true. It still has a very historic feeling.
Yes, for sure.
So I understand that your family bought the house in 2016. Is that about right?
Yes.
Yeah. And we're interested in knowing how you found the house and why it appealed to you.
Well, I'm not the one who found the house. It was my father. The first thing he noticed about this property was how far removed from the main road it was. And that to him indicated that this place would be serene. You really wouldn't hear the outside noises of the road. We're also quite removed from our neighbors as well, so it's just like, it feels like we're really the only people here.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, as soon as you come to the circular roundabout, you notice how big this house is and all the beautiful scenery around, from the river to the big open field over there to the farm over there, and then we have a bunch of trees over there. We don't really go there, but it's still beautiful to look at.
That's great. So you really appreciate the nature and the serenity that it
Absolutely.
that it provides.
Well, my family grew up in a very similar environment. Most of them were born and raised in the mountains. And they came from that type of environment to tall skyscrapers and concrete streets where there was none of that. And it was just like a complete 180 shift in a way. This is more like an homage to their lifestyle back then. And it's also, it feels like, it really does, how they described it to me, because I left when I was 5, but it really feels to them like they're walking outside their house in Albania, but it's here. It all worked out in the end, I guess I could say.
And for you personally, what do you enjoy about being here?
Beautiful. Everything around is beautiful, from the land to the house, even inside. It's wonderful to look at, if anything. It's just so aesthetically pleasing. It also has a sense of like coziness, and it also helps that everyone likes to be here as well as a family. So
Yeah.
just
And is there anything that you would want to be sure is preserved for future generations? Maybe all of it.
absolutely all of it. Ideally, that's the thing that draws people to this house, is how unique it is in itself. it wouldn't feel the same way if it was just, I don't know, built yesterday, you know, just with like Home Depot plywoods, sheetrocks, metal studs. This has a unique historical feeling where it's not part of your time, it's part of another time entirely. But it's like it survived to your time and you get to enjoy it. Somewhat like a museum in a way.
I get what you're saying. All right, well, thank you so much for having us here and for showing us around.
Please,
and
thank you for all the work you all put in, and I hope everything goes well. And
great.
it's mission accomplished.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Libertyville soon became a busy center with a hotel and basic services. Nathaniel Du Bois's grist mill, a favorite gathering place, is believed to have been the first water-powered mill in the region. Other milling activities on the Wallkill included a sawmill and a carding factory, which produced woolen coverlets, still prized today by Huguenot descendants and antique collectors.
In about 1850, Jonathan Deo was building his 1.5-story Greek Revival-style frame farmhouse with eyebrow windows just above the floodplains of the Wallkill. The entry hall and dining and living rooms in the front of the house retain their original Greek Revival features. The bedrooms upstairs were clustered under the low eaves of the house. In the early 1900s, the house was acquired by a Brooklyn coffee and sugar magnate, John Arbuckle, who eventually also acquired about 1,200 acres of farmland in Libertyville and Butterville. A friend of the Smileys and a philanthropist, Arbuckle provided land for what is now called the Mohunk Testimonial Gateway, honoring the Smileys. He is perhaps best known for starting the first fresh air camp in New Paltz around 1905, with farm fresh food and recreational activities for underprivileged children from Brooklyn. He modified the north side and the rear of the house for the children's dining and sleeping quarters. Swimming, walking trails, seesaws, and swings were among the many pastimes at this innovative camp. Later, he added the playroom building behind it for rainy day activities, built in the shingle style with oak batten walls and ceilings and a large cobblestone fireplace.
In 1828, the first Ulster County poorhouse opened on 110 acres south of the Du Bois House. A second complex of brick buildings, now demolished, replaced it in 1888 on the same lands that have served as the Ulster County Fairgrounds since 1967.
West of the Ulster County Fairgrounds, George Du Bois, at one time the New Paltz supervisor, had acquired over 200 acres of farmlands. He built this tenant farmhouse in 1882 with a typical federal layout and rural Italianate features. The large dairy barn with a gambrel roof was built by a subsequent owner in 1926 at the height of the dairy industry. More recent owners replaced the original Dutch barn with a barn-like guest cottage. Hi, Jane.
Hello.
So nice to be in your house today. I understand from talking to you before that you've lived here for about 10 years. We're interested in your perspective, having lived here, what it is that motivated you to acquire this property and what you love about it.
Sure, there's so much. So the first thing I would say as you look around is where it's situated. I'm English. I love old houses, but most old houses tend to be located right on the street. So the fact is that this is located at the top of the hill, and it has an aspect both towards the Mohunk, but also over to Highland. So you have privacy and you have wonderful views, 360 degrees.
Yeah, that's really special.
It is.
And you can't help when you're driving down Albany Post Road but notice this house because of its the way it's situated. Yeah. So you love the setting. And what about the house? What do you love about the house?
I love the fact that it's incredibly open, but it still has the character, the old character and the original character of when it was built. My mother always comments on the fact that it has no doors in the ground floor because they've taken all of those out so that it flows. but yet you still have the character of when it was originally built.
And what are some of the features that you would point to that define that character for you?
Sure. I think the main thing is the entryway and the hallway and the staircase, and the old staircase there, and the not code banister rail, which is clearly reflective of the era. For a short person, it's great.
Yeah, I agree with you that that is a beautiful entryway. And really a classic federal style house. We have a lot of those around here. So this was a farmhouse. Are there things about the house that say farm to you?
Oh Lord. Well, apart from the cows out front, I'm not really a farmer. I suppose the fact that it's on all of this land, again, I'm not American by background, so I don't know farm history. So that one's hard for me.
Okay,
yeah, sorry.
All right. Well, you have a beautiful new kitchen that was added and a beautiful sunroom that was added. So probably the old kitchen was not quite as commodious, right?
Correct, correct. When it was originally built, this was the side wall. And so it was much smaller. So whilst the rooms are actually good size for an old house, the addition and the flow has created a lot more openness and space. And it's certainly increased the size of the kitchen. And they've taken out the stairway that used to go down into the old basement.
I think one of the things that's noticeable about federal style houses is the beautiful proportions. And both in terms of the floor space, but also the headroom is always quite generous, and you definitely feel that
That's
in
true.
this house.
That's true. Which is interesting when we have a very low banister rail, but yet we have very high ceilings and also very big windows, which I love windows. So I really appreciate that feature. Yes, and the light.
The light is beautiful.
There are windows everywhere.
Is there something else you'd like to tell us about the house?
I would say that it really feels like home. We wanted it to be a farmhouse that people felt that they could come into and feel comfortable. It's not a show home, it's somewhere that a family lives. And whilst I love old houses, I also think that they have to evolve with the times so that you can live in them. They're not historical relics, they're supposed to house families and lives. And I like to think that hundreds of years from now, this house will still be here and we will just be another person that passed through and the family that lived here. And I always think that's so special about old houses, how much history there is in here and your little piece of it.
Yeah, and you're a steward of the house and the land.
And the land, that's right, that's right.
That's really important and we appreciate that you're doing that.
Not at all.
Just to the north, also on former George Du Bois farmland, a unique contemporary house has been built, and the owners continue the farming traditions begun there more than 2 centuries ago. Hi, Kim.
Hi.
It's great to be here in your house today. Such a unique and beautiful domicile. And you've explained to us a little bit about your vision for creating this house and how you went about it. And so we want to give you the opportunity to tell people how you envisioned this and the process you went through.
I guess it all started when I walked into a timber frame house years ago, and I looked around and thought, wow, I would love to live here. But how do you make that happen?
Explain for people the difference between a timber frame house and a post and beam house.
This is a great question. So timber framing is quite different. So a lot of people will call a timber frame a post and beam. And when we work with timber framers, that's taboo. So post and beam are made with all the joints with metal hardware. And a timber frame actually uses pegs, and you stick the peg through a hole, and all the joinery in the house is made only with wood. Timber framing was this long time art. And when you get to make something from scratch and you're able to create and you see that vision, I wanted to put something here on this earth that would outlast me and would be here a lifetime. And that's what a timber frame does.
Could you talk about the wood a little bit? And then I want you to talk about Old Glory.
Okay, so the wood in this house really came from out west. It was not like we just walked into a shop and you find the wood. We had to go exploring. So we would fly back and forth to Montana. We worked with these amazing artisans that were timber framers, and we would find wood in very special places. Sometimes we would drive miles and miles into these dark fields in Montana through the wilderness, and then all of a sudden come up to a wood yard. And there would be something that we didn't even know what it was, but they're like, that's part of your timber frame house. And we have different variations of wood. The majority is Doug fir, which is most popular out west. And then also there's some larch, which is also a very pretty type of wood. And I think the most interesting find, when I think back, is at one point I wanted these really large, massive timbers. So we actually went down to Colorado, and we heard about this dumpster that was filled with a burn. And inside that dumpster basically were these massive, massive timbers. And what we did, or what they did, they peeled them back like a banana. And
peeled off the burn part.
All the burn parts came off, and underneath was these magical giant sticks of timber. And so that's how we came about with the wood.
How about Old Glory?
Okay, so she's special. Old Glory holds up this whole house, and it goes from all the way down to the lower level, through the foyer, up into the loft, and it's what holds up this entire house. And I have to say, she's this big, beautiful, standing dead piece, and we prayed that Old Glory would have the strength and what she did, and she doesn't disappoint to this day. Sometimes you even just have to go up and hug her, and most people do. You know, one of the things I wanted to ensure was when you walked into this house, you wanted to feel that you were one with nature. And one of the things I hope I achieved was sort of taking a look at the lighting structure and saying, well, how can we look at this, and what's my favorite things in the world? And that's sort of looking at the stars and the moon, the planets, and saying, well, how can we now take that into lighting? So a lot of the lights we built ourselves, and you see these orbs of light that just reflect, and they cast different shadows throughout the house, and they glisten on the wood at night. And it's truly feeling that you're under that moon or those stars every single second that you're in the house in the evenings. And you could just take that breath and feel like you are one with nature.
So could you talk a little bit about the setting and how you positioned the house and why?
Sure. People thought we were crazy. So the house actually has a flat piece of land, and then it slopes down. And I remember our excavator saying to us, why are you placing your house on the down? And one of the things I realized was the relationship of where we're going to put the house, what we would see, what people from the street would see. And I really wanted this house to be tucked away. We have a beautiful view of the ridge, but yet you can't see us from the road. And, you know, one of the big things as we're looking at the Shawangunk Mountains, which are stunning every day, all of a sudden we were focusing our efforts on that front view, but then we turned around and to the back of us was just this incredible mountainous view. And then we wanted to use the Earth's elements, like the sun, to warm the house in the winter. So a lot of that solar heat gain coefficient came in, and we used the sun in the winter with these large overhangs to protect us in the summertime to not have a lot of heat. But in the winter, we take all that heat and we're not paying for it. And so, you know, I think the placement of the house is unique. I came to this area back in, I guess it was 1997 when I started skydiving here. And I knew that year, the second I came up to Gardiner, New York, I said, this is where I want to live for the rest of my life.
Well, you and your husband have created an incredible work of art that will be here for a long, long time.
Fingers crossed.
And so thank you. Is there anything else you want to add before we end?
I just think one thing to new homeowners, as you're building, let's be conscious about what we're building these days and try to get things that make sense for the planet, make sense that will be here for lifetimes beyond us, and keeping things that are green and good for the environment, and that will be here way beyond our years.